This lesson will prepare you for section 9.7, which introduces the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula will be our final method for solving quadratic equations. So let's just review the methods we've already studied. The first method we looked at was graphing, and that's a good method, although it does require a calculator and usually will give approximate answers if there's decimals involved. So that's the limitations of that. Secondly, we can solve them by factoring. The solution is usually fairly quick if you can factor it, but remember, some quadratics won't factor, so that doesn't allow us to solve them all. The next thing we looked at was completing the square, which always works, but it's a lot of steps, and students do tend to make mistakes, as well as teachers, when they use that method. So the final method that we're looking at is the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula always works, and I'm going to describe it as plug and chug. You just plug numbers into a formula and then chug through the simplification. All right, what does the quadratic formula look like? If you have a quadratic equation in general form, meaning ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are numbers, then the quadratic formula is right there for you. Next time in class, I'll actually put it to a melody so that will help you remember it. In terms of how to use it, there's basically 3 steps. First, make sure your equation is in general form so you can correctly identify a, b, and c. Then you plug into the formula. And the third step is usually the most work, and that is simplifying. Let's go through 3 examples that will show you 3 different things that might happen. So I've put the quadratic formula at the top of the screen so we can refer to that. And I'll go ahead and solve this in blue. The first step is to put it in general form, which means it's supposed to be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 12 from each side. And then I can correctly determine that a, the quadratic coefficient, is 2. B, the linear coefficient, is 5, and C, the constant, be careful, it's negative 12. Now I plug into the formula. To find x, it's negative b, b is 5, so negative 5, plus or minus, that's how I'm going to get 2 answers, one with plus, one with minus. The square root of b squared, that's 5 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So there's the plug, here comes the chug. We're going to simplify that. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared is 25. And then 4 times 2 is 8. And 8 times 12. 8 times 12 is 96. And because that's negative, it's going to be minus negative or plus 96. All over 2 times 2 is 4. Still more steps. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of, if you add 25 and 96, you get 121. Still over 4. Now, in this example, 121 is a perfect square. If you put it into your calculator, or if you know your times tables well enough, that's 11. And then finally, let's actually crank this out. Negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16, or negative 5 plus 11 is 6. So you get these 2 answers if you reduce or simplify those. Negative 4 or 3/2. And there you have it, the quadratic formula used to solve a quadratic equation. The next example will work out somewhat differently, same idea, but again, the first step is to put it in general form. So I'm going to subtract the 6x and add the 1 so that it's equal to 0. A, well, the quadratic coefficient is 1. B, your linear coefficient, is negative 6, and C is 1. So now I plug in. X is negative b, Since b is -6, negative b will be +6, plus or minus the square root of b. Remember, when you square a negative number, if you're going to use your calculator, you better put it in parentheses. B squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, 2 times 1. That's the plug. Here comes the chug. 6 plus or minus the square root of -6 squared is +36 minus 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. All over 2 times 1 is 2. And let's see, this isn't how I remembered, but let's go ahead and keep chugging. So 6 plus or minus the square root of 32. 36 minus 4 is 32, all over 2. And in this case, there is a way of simplifying that, but you haven't learned it yet. If the number under the radical, in this case 32, is not a perfect square, if you plug that into your calculator, you're going to get 5 point something. Then you can just stop with what I've circled. The final example that I go through, yet one more thing happens. This one's already in standard form, or general form, so I'm ready to determine that a is 3, b is 2, and c is 2. And then I plug in x is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared. I'm going to actually square b, that's 4, minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times 3. All right, let's simplify this. -2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times 2 is 24. All over 2 times 3 is 6, or -2 plus or minus the square root of -20 over 6. As soon as you notice that the number under the square root is negative, then you're going to just stop and write no solution, because we cannot take the square root of a negative number. There is a way of doing it. That's something you'll learn in Algebra 2. And then you'll be able to find solutions to all quadratic equations. For your homework, the 3 problems listed here are very much like the 3 that I went through in this tutorial. So if you need a reminder of how to do them, just rewind the video and look at each example. They go in the same order as the ones that I demonstrated. Please have this ready for class next time.